I think a lot of the sort of journalist I became is because of Charlie. For me, he is certainly a mentor that I will never forget. Politicians have a terrific capacity to defend what they said. I don't regret people walking out of my interview, except in the sense that it would be much nicer if they'd finished the interview. Yes. The most famous of the so-called walkout interviews is Dear Prime Minister Modi. He gave that interview a guarantee of life, which I think he must now regret.
Do you ever feel you've been misunderstood in your profession?
I enjoy the job I do enormously. I'm very happy I'm doing it. There are occasions when I think people have misunderstood me. I think misunderstandings happen to all of us in our lives. When it happens, there's not much you can do about it. You have to accept. I don't think I'm a tough person personally. To be tough journalistically is a good quality. Television, or the screen rather, has a way of capturing part of your personality and exaggerating it. Always be true to yourself, but always keep asking yourself at the back of your mind, am I making a mistake? It's nice to be popular, I know, but it's so much better to be truthful to yourself.
Thank you so much, Mr. Thapar, for your time today. It's an utmost pleasure to have you with me. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to be with you. Thank you for inviting me.
Mr. Thapar, so we have known so much of you, but I would like to start with a young boy, a Doon student. You know, that's also a journey that began as a Doon student that you have. Did you always have the knack that you want to be a journalist or a writer or editor, or had this whole thing about news, or it developed over time?
I don't know what you mean. Did I always have a feeling I wanted to be a journalist? Because remember, I joined Doon School when I was just over 10 years old. Yes. And I certainly hadn't at that stage worked out what I wanted to be. I didn't have a clear idea. Leave aside a clear idea, I didn't have any idea. But during my time at Doon, the Doon School Weekly was something that attracted me. I began writing for it. I enjoyed writing. And I suppose what happens is things give you an opportunity to discover a talent. You enjoy something, you do more of it, you get recognized for it. And as a result, it becomes a part of your life. And yes, I did end up as editor-in-chief of the Doon School Weekly.
You are an army chief's son. So there is a certain conduct that we see in your discipline, the way you present yourself, the way you talk, the way you're holding yourself up straight. You know, we've seen so many anchors, but it's something very appealing of your way of asking question. So has that got anything to do with your family background, you know?
I'm not sure you can actually attribute my style to my military background. I don't think there's anything very military or martial about my manner and behavior, possibly my rather loud, boisterous, booming voice. But I don't think that is something I've inherited from my father. It's just me. I think, to be honest, how I speak, how I conduct myself is perhaps more influenced not by my father's military background, although that would be nice if it were the case. I think it's more influenced by the years I spent in England. Certainly, if people detect a trace of an English accent in my manner, that is the cause of it. I think also my television manner is influenced by the years I spent working for British television, particularly London weekend television. And I think the style of interviewing I do is modeled upon, influenced by the sort of interviewing that I saw, that I produced, that I did myself during the 12, 13 years I worked for British television in London.
We have this thing of understanding, you know, every time in our life, we have some turning point. There are multiple turning points in life. For you, which is that memorable turning point in personal life? You know, you sometimes have somebody telling you something or a moment that goes like a turning point. You never go back from there. Has there been anything like that?
I don't know whether turning point is the right phrase to describe what I'm about to tell you, but certainly the person concerned was a mentor in my life and a colleague and a boss, and he had an enormous influence on me when I was a young journalist actually starting out on my very first job. I'm talking about October, November, December of 1980. I was the London Times correspondent in Nigeria. It was my first job. The deputy editor, who was the foreign editor, was a man called Charlie Douglas Hume. And he knew that I had never actually been a journalist. I'd never reported for a paper. So not only was I unfamiliar with the technical, stylistic details of newspaper reporting, but I was also unfamiliar with the system the Times had itself. Yeah. And what he said to me when I arrived in Lagos is that instead of filing to the desk, send your copy directly to me. And for the first 3 months, he would ring me every single evening at around 11:30 at night. And that was hugely helped by the fact that Lagos and London are really on the same time zone, so there's no time difference. Perhaps an hour, but I don't even think that 1 hour exists. And every single night for the first 3 months of my time in Lagos, he would do a sort of tutorial with me. And that taught me not just the style and the manner in which you handle a story and shape it, but also the little, if I can call them, tricks that journalists use to push things to the top and ensure that it gets more attention than otherwise it would. And at the end of 3 months, he said to me, well, tomorrow you start filing straight to the desk, you know how to do it. And then about a year later, when I left, and I went off to London Weekend Television because I'd been offered a job by LWT where I stayed for the next 12 years. Charlie got in touch with me roughly 2 months after I'd left and said to me, I'd like you to do leaders for the Times. And I said, you know, Charlie, I've never written a leader in my life. He said, but you've never written an article in your life before you went to Lagos and you picked it up very soon. You'll do it again. And he showed enormous confidence in me, belief in me, and that gave me confidence as well. He was truly a mentor who spent a lot of time teaching, guiding, helping, supporting, but also pushing, encouraging. And I think he saw things in me when I was in my mid and late 20s that I didn't identify in myself. And he gave me the opportunity to give those talents a certain space. He encouraged it. And I think a lot of the sort of journalist I became is because of Charlie. Charlie sadly died shortly thereafter of cancer. But for me, he is certainly a mentor that I will never forget. Now, I don't know whether that's a turning point in life or not, but it was certainly, if I can coin a phrase, a making point. That is one of the moments in my life when I, as a journalist, was made, and the credit is entirely Charlie's.
I have to ask you one more thing. All your show names, I was trying to read all of them. Eyewitness, Tonight at 10, In the Focus with Karan, Line of Fire, War of Words, Devil's Advocate. All of the show's name have something to talk about, the truth, the direct talk, to the point. What is it? Is it a conscious decision that your shows have these titles? Or it just means to give a message out, you want to talk no nonsense, just get to the point?
This is not something I'd ever noticed before. You're pointing it out to me, and now that you point it out, I recognize what you're saying. But it's happened coincidentally. Obviously, there must have been something at the back of my mind that has ensured that this would happen, but it wasn't deliberate. It wasn't deliberate. It wasn't done consciously. It's just the way it turned out. Are names that were copied from programs that I either worked for during my 11, 12 years with London Weekend Television, or programs that were very popular on British TV at the time. Devil's Advocate is a Channel 4 program made for Channel 4 by LWT. I never worked on it, although I was a guest on it once, but I knew it and liked the name and copied it consciously. Eyewitness is a program I worked on, was a producer of for years. And again, it is a conscious copy.
One statement you had made in one of your interviews where you said politicians are unabashed, not aware of the content they say, and unapologetic to an extent. You still think that it's the same situation when it comes to politicians and at large?
Perhaps not sure in what context I said it. And to be honest, I can't remember saying it. And I'll take your word when you say I said it, that I did say it. I won't dispute it. But not knowing the context in which I said it, I find it very hard to answer that question. Because really, you're throwing something at me that I said. And remember, I've been alive for 65 years, so there are a lot of things I've said. But who knows when I said it, why I said it, what I was referring to, what the context was. So I really can't explain any further. But what I can do is to say that Politicians have a terrific capacity to defend what they said, because if they don't, they embarrass and humiliate themselves. It's very difficult for politicians to back away, to accept they made an error, to apologize for a mistake. Sometimes they do. Let's not be dogmatic about it. Often they do, but mostly they do defend what they've said. They do find arguments for justifying it or explaining it and standing by it. And there's nothing wrong in it, unless what they're defending is a gross and terrible mistake. Sometimes it is, by the way. But unless it is a gross and terrible mistake, consistency is also a virtue, just as obstinacy is a vice.
I want to know that some of your interviews, it's been spoken a lot. I think you've explained it a lot with walkout interviews with Karan Thapar. That's also a way to look at it. Very few, but there are some famous or infamous to say so. Do you really think that you would ever say, I regret or I introspected them? What is your way to look at those incidents?
I don't regret people walking out of my interview, except in the sense that it would be much nicer if they'd finished the interview. And therefore, in that sense, that the interview was left incomplete, there is a sense of regret that someone got up and walked away. But if by regret do you mean, do I accept that I made a mistake as a result of which they walked out? No, I don't. The most famous of the walkouts, and that's a lovely way of describing those interviews, by the way. I'm going to use that phrase with your permission. But the most famous of the so-called walkout interviews is Dear Prime Minister Modi.
I'll have to rest for a water. Yeah.
Still unwilling to talk about his role during the post-Godhra riots, Gujarat Chief Minister Narendra Modi abruptly ends an interview with CNN IBN's Karan Thapar on Devil's Advocate when asked if he regretted.
Who walked out of an interview roughly 2 minutes and 40 seconds after it began. Actually, he didn't so much walk out as he took the mic off, asked for a glass of pani and said he could do no more. But we carried on chatting for a whole hour where I tried very hard. He was extremely polite about it. He was, in fact, very hospitable. He gave me tea and dhokla and barfi. I mean, I tried very hard during that period to persuade him to stay on and to do the interview. And I said to him that, look, I know you've been put off about the line of questioning regarding Godhra and your handling of Godhra and the fact that it might have been better for you to accept that a mistake was made and apologize for it. But I don't have to do that at the beginning. I can begin the interview again and do it at the end. I only did it at the beginning because I assumed that you would realize that this question is going to come up. And if I didn't bring it up and get it out of the way quickly, it would hang like a sort of Damocles over the interview. And that would no doubt cause you tension and perhaps even unnerve you. And so I thought it was wiser and sensible to get it out of the way, clear the tracks and move on to other subjects. But if you preferred it brought up later on, fine. I'll begin again and bring it up at the end. But he didn't want to listen to that, and that didn't persuade him to do it again. And then I said to him that, look, if you leave me with 2 minutes and 30, 40 seconds, then this will become a news item.
Yes.
And it will be shown in every single bulletin that the channel being CNN IBN runs. Whereas if you do a full interview, it will be shown once, repeated once, and forgotten. And even that didn't persuade him. And in the end, I left after an hour because I had a plane to catch to Delhi and I couldn't afford delaying it. And that 2 minutes, 40 seconds section became a news item. It was shown repeatedly by the channel, I think not just in every bulletin the next day, but quite often thereafter. It now has a life of its own in YouTube, where it's had more than maybe 1.5 million or 2 million hits or whatever you call them. And I think that had he done the interview, rather than leave me with just 2.5 minutes, it would have been a forgotten item. No one would have remembered it. But leaving me with just 2.5 minutes meant that he gave that interview a guarantee of life, which I think he must now regret.
Do you ever feel that you were one of the most celebrated, fabulous interview conductor or anchor, host, everything, but somewhere connecting to the interviewee, you lost the cord somewhere with some interview that you could not connect to the people? Do you ever feel so that the reactions that came was, you were good at the professional aspect of relating to the truth and facts, but somewhere the people connection was missing at some point that led to such kind of reaction?
But I don't think there's a people connection that's necessary when you're doing current affairs interviews. It's a different matter when you're doing celebrity chat show interviews. That's a completely different thing. I'm not talking about them. In a current affairs interview, you are holding someone accountable, which means that you are either putting to them an interpretation or a viewpoint that they don't like. And there's no question of a connect with them, because obviously they will be resistant to what you're doing.
Yes.
Or you are interpreting and putting in a context what they've done, again, in a manner in which they won't like it. So
Yes.
either of those will guarantee that there is a certain frisson, a certain adversity, perhaps even a certain aggressiveness, although hopefully not too much, between you and the guest. So a people's connect would be wrong, because a people's connect would suggest a measure of sympathy, a measure of understanding, and that would undermine the journalistic content of the interview. But if you talk specifically about people who walked away, they didn't walk away because there was no people's connect. They walked away because they didn't like the line of questioning, and they realized that it was going in a direction that would make it worse for them if they stayed on. And so, in a sense, from their standpoint, walking away was an attempt to cut their losses. I won't say cut their losses and run, but cut their losses and get away. Now, the people who I record who walked away were Narendra Modi, first and famously after 2 minutes, 40 seconds roughly. I think it happened on 2 occasions with Ram Jethmalani, and on both occasions it was because he didn't like the line of questioning. Oddly enough, both interviews actually ended up winning the Asian award, the Asian Television Award for Best Journalism, which is perhaps the most prestigious award in our part of the world, far more prestigious than any of the local awards we give in India, which sometimes are rather dubiously handed out. So you have to understand what lies behind a guest getting up and walking away. It's very rarely, if ever, in a current affairs interview, what you call a person connect. It's to do with the fact they don't like a particular type of questioning. There was another fractious interview, but the guest didn't walk away. She stayed till the bitter end, but then made it clear she hadn't enjoyed it. And that's former Chief Minister Jayalalitha.
So one question, then you answered it all so candidly. Thank you for that. But one question I have is, do you ever feel you've been misunderstood in your profession? Or do you have any feeling of that kind? Or how was the journey in short? Do you enjoy your media?
I enjoy the job I do enormously. I'm very happy I'm doing it. I'm very grateful for the opportunities that I've had to interview a variety of people, from David Cameron and Condoleezza Rice, Margaret Thatcher, Tony Blair, to name people who are heads of government abroad, through to Rajiv Gandhi, Narendra Modi, Manmohan Singh, VP Singh, Chandrasekhar, Deva Gowda, Inder Gujral, all of whom have been our own prime ministers here. Do I ever feel misunderstood? That was the second part. I mean, there are occasions when I think people have misunderstood me. I think misunderstandings happen to all of us in our lives. But when you realize there is a misunderstanding, you make an effort to clear it immediately. And I think usually it's quite possible to do so. But what you can't clear is something I wouldn't call a misunderstanding. That's when someone doesn't like what you're doing and they haven't misunderstood. They just decided they don't like it because it doesn't suit them. And that's their prerogative. And obviously, because that's not a misunderstanding, you can't clarify it. You just have to learn to live with it. There are people and they have a right not to like you or not to like something about you or the way you're asking questions. That's not a misunderstanding. That's their prerogative. It's their right. It's their choice. It's a sad outcome. It does happen occasionally. Hopefully, I don't think it's happened very often. But when it happens, there's not much you can do about it. You have to accept.
Lastly, if there is a biography on Karan Thapar or a movie being made, what title you would suggest should be given to it on your journey, your life?
No. I wouldn't suggest a title to anyone who writes a biography of me in any way. I don't think anyone's going to write a biography of me either, but that is their choice, not mine.
You're known as a tough guy. Do you think that suits well?
I don't have no problem with it. If someone thinks I am a tough guy because of the exterior that they see, I have no problem with that image. I think, to be honest, to be tough journalistically is a good quality. I don't think I'm a tough person personally. If you were to get to know me, you will discover that I'm far from tough. Therefore, there is a certain, how shall I put it, Jekyll and Hyde quality to me. I'm not necessarily the way I come across on television. And remember, television, or the screen rather, has a way of capturing part of your personality and exaggerating it.
Yes.
And that does for the audience become the truth. But it's not the whole truth, and it's not the only truth. But that is the image, and you have to live with it. That's a fact of life. So I have no problem if I'm seen as tough. I'd rather be seen as tough than namby-pamby.
I have a very sweet request. I don't know if you like it or not. You can tell me. I always ask my guests to leave us with a song that they hum. And that
Hallelujah. I won't leave you with the song because it will kill this completely.
Oh.
I cannot sing, and I am tuneless and toneless. I have to tell you, on the few odd occasions when I've tried it, my sisters laugh and say, Christ, you're totally, totally out of tune.
Any two lines?
So I'm not going to do that, forgive me, because honestly, it would be hurtful to people's ears.
I don't think it would be. I think I would appreciate it.
Oh, it would be, I assure you. I assure you, it would be hurtful to people's ears. I cannot carry a tune for the life of me.
Two lines that you leave.
No, you're not going to persuade me, I assure you.
A line of message for youngsters, line of life. I don't know. You must be believing in something in life you want to leave us with.
I tell you the message I leave for youngsters, and that is a very simple one. You know, always be true to yourself, but always keep asking yourself at the back of your mind, am I making a mistake? And if you're true to yourself, but you're also asking yourself, am I making a mistake? You'll correct the mistake, and you will always do what is genuinely the right thing. And don't worry if others think it's wrong or don't like it. There are lots of things in life that others won't like. It's nice to be popular, I know, but it's so much better to be truthful to yourself. And therefore, my advice is never be scared of doing something if you really believe it's the right thing. Don't allow others to make up your mind for you, particularly on critical, moral, or sometimes political issues. If you believe it's correct and you're sure, do it. Do it fearlessly, but do it in a way in which you don't hurt and upset people. Sometimes, obviously, you will, and it can't be avoided, but don't do it gratuitously to hurt people. That's my advice to everyone.
How nice. And you know, I thought of the title I would give to your book is Fearless and Truthful Man. I think that goes well.
That's very sweet of you. Thank you very much indeed.
Yes, thank you so much for your time, sir. It's a pleasure. You forgive me.
Not at all. Pleasure.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Take care, sir. Take care. Bye.